Hello there, welcome back to Jennie Designs with Paper and this week's episode of Crime and Coloring, where we take an alphabetical journey through the United States and revisit some of the earlier crimes. But before we talk crime, let's talk coloring. This is an old Stampin' Up! Stamp set. I know you cannot get it anymore, but I did a little bit of Googling, and there are some very similar images out there where you have the legs or the bottom half of a person and multiple things that you can put in their hands or on the top part of their body. So lots of stamp sets like it. I will be stamping in Simon Says Stamp Intense Black ink on Neenah Classic Crest Solar White cardstock, and I will be coloring with my Copic markers, and I will put those color combinations in the description box down below. One thing I've learned about this stamp set is that you need to stamp the bottom half or the top half of the body first, so that you can line up the bottom half of the body with the torso. It's really hard to see those little torso lines, especially in the balloon image where there's a little tiny peak of a blouse sticking out from behind the balloons. And I know that because I had to stamp it twice. Once I have stamped and gotten everything ready to color, I will be picking some color combinations to match a piece of pattern paper from a Cartabella paper pad called Gather at Home. And I will, like I said, put those color combinations down in the description bar below. Oh, the balloons. So I knew there was something about the coloring I wanted to talk about. The balloons. I wanted to color these balloons as if you could kind of see the colors of the other balloons or the shadows of the balloons in the back through the balloons in the front. And I think it was mostly successful. There was a little bit of bleeding involved. I had to figure out how to compensate, and I did that by adding a die cut sentiment on the front. So now that we have talked about the coloring, let's talk about the crime. Our alphabetical journey today takes us to the state of Indiana. And let me tell you, I don't know what it is about Indiana, but their unsolveds were really hard to find old ones. So our case today is actually 1900s, so not super old. But in 1787, the Northwest Territory was created, and modern-day Indiana was part of that territory. Then Ohio was separated from the Northwest Territory, and that left most of that land as Indiana Territory. President Thomas Jefferson chose William Henry Harrison as the governor of that territory, and a city called Vincennes, I'm probably butchering that, was pronounced the capital. Then the Michigan Territory was created, taking more land from the Indiana Territory. And then the Illinois Territory was formed, taking even more land. But that left us with what is the current state or the geographical state of Indiana. Now, once Indiana it's the territory that's, the shape and size it is today, the capital was actually moved. It was moved to Corden, Indiana, farther south, and this was done to kind of protect the capital from raids from the Native Americans following the Battle of Tippecanoe. 2 years after moving the capital down to Corden, a petition for statehood was approved by the Territorial Assembly and sent to Congress. An enabling act was passed that allowed for the election of delegates to write a constitution for Indiana. And then on June 10th of 1816, the delegates assembled in Corden, and it took them 19 days to write the constitution for the state of Indiana. That constitution was presented and accepted, and James Madison approved Indiana's admission as a state in the Union on December 11th, 1816, the 19th state. And the official state capital was then, the capital was officially moved. So they moved all of the proceedings to Corden, but then in 1825 that Corden was, or Corydon, however you pronounce it, became the official capital. And, you might think Indiana is a sleepy little state. It's, not one of the most populous. But there's some unusual things going on there. Indiana was home to the first successful goldfish farm. It opened in 1899. Indiana is one of the largest producers of popcorn. They contribute 20% of the supply in the United States. Indiana is home to a 20-foot peach called Big Peach that is located near a replica of the Washington Monument. Before you go fishing in Indiana, make sure you are aware of their unique fish and game laws. For example, check your fishing gear because it is illegal to use dynamite, firearms, a crossbow, or your bare hands to catch fish. Other weird laws: don't go into a liquor store and ask for a soda or a bottle of water. That is forbidden. In 1972, it rained money in Indiana. Well, kind of. $500,000 fell from the sky onto the farm of Lowell Elliott. It turned out that a parachuter dropped stolen money all over the farm, and Lowell did return it. In 1831, the village of Amity created a cemetery overlooking Sugar Creek. And later in time, the cemeteries in the area were relocated to make room for Camp Atterbury. But one tenant of the Sugar Creek Cemetery, Nancy Barnett, well, her son protested the moving of her remains. So the state built a bridge over her burial site, and in 1912, it became a state historical site. And on a much sadder note, Indiana is where a death in a cornfield still remains unsolved. Let's start with Robert Louis, and I'm going to butcher this name, and I apologize, Harmier. We're going to go with that, Harmier. Robert was born on the 23rd of March in 1819 in Indiana, in Milton, Indiana. And he lived there through his childhood. He graduated from Lincoln High School in 1936 and went to school at Indiana University and received a Bachelor of Arts degree and a Bachelor of Law degree and met the eventual Mrs. Harmier. Marjorie Daly was from Bicknell, the whole other side of the state of Indiana, and she was also attending Indiana University in Bloomington. Robert was 4 years older than Marjorie, and he actually enlisted in the Army in 1943 during World War II. Marjorie stayed in Bloomington and finished her teaching degree, and the two were married after Robert was discharged from the Army in 1946. They moved to Cambridge City, a community of about 2,400 people, and set up their home. Robert taught school in Steuben and Henry counties, which, okay, he has a law degree and he taught school. I'm just floored by that, but he taught school. Marjorie was also a teacher. She taught vocal instruction and piano lessons and was the vocal instructor, or what we would call the choir teacher or chorus teacher, in the Cambridge City and Jackson Township schools. Robert and Marjorie had one daughter, Anne. Anne was born on the 27th of August, 1857. But sadly, 4 years later, when Anne was just a little girl, Robert died of a brain tumor at the age of 44. Marjorie never remarried. She raised Anne as a doting and reportedly demanding single mother. And the two were peas in a pod. Marjorie and Anne were well known in town and they were well liked. Marjorie taught voice in the schools and piano lessons to many of the children in town, and her daughter was no exception. And Anne was talented, and she spent an enormous amount of her time improving those talents. In the 4th grade, Anne and two of her friends actually formed a band called Tommy Tucker Trio, and they would literally perform for a meal, and every performance was accompanied by Marjorie. Anne's love for music and song continued to grow. In high school, she sang in the choir. She played the oboe in the school band. She landed the leading role of the Navy nurse Nellie Forbush in the high school's production of South Pacific. She also landed the leading role of Maria in a summer production of West Side Story. She was selected the queen of her hometown's annual Canal Day Festival. Anne and Marjorie were just well liked. They were good people. But that wasn't all Anne was. She was a member of her local church, She sang in the choir. She visited shut-ins. She wrote notes to people who could not leave their home. She helped the children in the church decorate the Christmas tree that would be in the church sanctuary. She was just a good young lady. And it was reported that after Anne left for college, when she would come home, she would leave notes under her pillow and in other places for her mom to find. They were short. It would say things like, "Thanks for a good weekend," or just, "I love you." And Marjorie and Anne looked out for each other in other ways too. One family member told the story of how when they would go on road trips, Anne had the idea of hanging a man's suit or coat in their car to disguise the fact that two women were traveling alone. Anne also enjoyed being a typical kid. She drank Mountain Dew, she ate pizza, she ate quarter pounders from McDonald's, she liked junk food and chocolate. She was also fun and playful. One funny story that was told about Anne was that her mother would say, "Anne, you're a dear." And Anne would respond, "No, I'm an antelope." So she also had a dad joke sense of humor. In the fall of 1975, after graduating at the top of her high school class, Anne began attending college at Indiana University in Bloomington because, both of her parents had gone to school there, and she did still have extended family that lived in the area. Anne had actually spent a lot of her time growing up visiting the campus, including going to football games. So it just made sense that this is where she would go to college. Those who knew Anne knew she was destined for greatness. How that greatness manifested depended on who you talked to. Some people knew she would graduate college and become a singer or an actress on Broadway or on TV. Others thought she would choose the same path as her mother and become a music and performance teacher. And still others thought she might turn her life to the ministry at the church. But regardless of where people thought Anne's life was going to go, in the fall of 1977, everything changed, and then it came to a screeching halt. On Monday, September 12th, after returning home from college for a weekend to visit a friend in the hospital, Anne got into her 1971 Pontiac Le Mans and began the roughly two-hour trip back to campus. She left rather early in the morning because she had a 10:30 class. Somewhere along Highway 37, her car broke down about 20 minutes after leaving for Bloomington. So she hadn't been on the road very long. When Anne wasn't in her 10:30 class, her classmates were surprised. Marjorie was also surprised because Anne was in the habit of and had promised to call her mother when she got back on campus, and Marjorie had not received a phone call. Later that day, when Anne missed a rehearsal, people knew something was really, really wrong. After repeatedly calling Anne's off-campus apartment phone and receiving no answer, Marjorie and a friend got into a car and headed toward Bloomington, following the direction Anne would have traveled. At almost midnight, or it was nearly midnight rather, when they came across Anne's car parked on the side of the road. The car was locked and the hazard lights were flashing, and her laundry and her textbooks were still in the car. All of this was wrong, and Marjorie knew it was wrong. So Marjorie and her friend headed to the nearest police station to report that this was wrong. Something was wrong. Anne was missing, and it was just nothing was right about this. It was determined that the engine radiator was out of water and the car had overheated. Police later discovered that she had actually stopped a couple of times along the trip at some gas stations to have them look at her car. And the last one she stopped at was only about 10 miles from where her car eventually stopped altogether. But where was Anne? So back home in Cambridge City, people rallied around. They had regular meetings about what they could do to get the word out about Anne's disappearance. They wanted to help find out what happened to Anne. Anne was reportedly a cautious person. And most of her friends and family thought she would not get into a car with someone she didn't know. There were some who thought Anne may have been so concerned about missing that 10:30 class that she may have accepted a ride from somebody to get back to college in time. Whatever the case, the fact that Anne's car was locked on the side of the road with the hazards flashing was an odd detail. At some point in time, she had left her car willingly. Now, what happened to her after that still was to be discovered. The Indiana State Police and the Morgan County Sheriff's Department stepped up and devoted significant resources and staff to the investigation. They reportedly conducted a road check near where Anne's car had broken down. They actually towed the car back to the spot where it broke down and stopped vehicles traveling along the highway, Highway 37, and asked them if they had traveled that way a week before. Did they recognize this car? Had they seen this car? Had they seen Anne? They showed a picture of Anne. Did you see Anne? Did you see Anne talking to anyone? Did you see anyone watching Anne? They were really in it. They thought for sure somebody who traveled that road regularly would have seen something. And that's what they were looking for. Somebody who had seen Anne in the last few minutes of her life. Now, Anne disappeared before the internet and cell phones, but that did not hamper her community. They printed and distributed flyers with Anne's photo and information. They erected a billboard. Anne's story was even featured on the national news. People did not want to believe that a popular, kind young adult could disappear without a trace. The search into Anne's disappearance kind of fizzled out as the weeks went on, and then kind of died. But then, toward the end of October, things ramped up again. In October, there was a farmer working in fields not like 7 or 10 miles from where Anne's car was found, and he found human remains. The farmer called the police, who responded immediately, and it was reported the officials knew right away that it was Anne. She was last seen wearing a red Indiana University t-shirt, and this body in the field was wearing a red Indiana University t-shirt. They also confirmed her ID with dental records, and then they found her purse nearby in the field. It was kind of a gruesome scene, and I will not tell you everything that I read, but Anne had been tied up and strangled with her own shoelaces, and there was evidence that she had been sexually assaulted. After the discovery of Anne's body, the investigation that had stalled a little bit took off with full force again. The police chased down every lead they could find. There was a report of a woman matching Anne's description seen at a Deep Rock service station in a car with people in a car that had Kentucky license plates. The car had the license plate, not the people. Police looked at a Texas man who had sexually assaulted and killed a woman in Ohio just 2 days before Anne was abducted. They considered an Indiana University student who worked in Martinsville and had come to them with some very specific information about the case. But I did not read anywhere what that information was. A man in a mental institution was briefly a suspect. Police encountered a Kentucky man serving 2 life sentences for murders resembling Anne's, and found that he had been driving through Morgan County the day she disappeared. Then there was a witness who, under hypnosis, described a clean-shaven white male in his 20s with blonde hair and bangs, and the witness saw this man beating a woman inside a car near the field where Anne's remains were found. The witness's description matches a man named Stephen Judy, who confessed to killing several women in the same manner that Anne was killed. He confessed to having strangled women with tourniquets made from things he found at the scene of his crimes, and he admitted to having sexually assaulted these women. However, the murders that Stephen confessed to doing occurred a year and a half after Anne was murdered. Some investigators still believe that Steve killed Anne, that she was his first, even though that the Marion County Jail records indicate Stephen was behind bars on the day that Anne disappeared and died. And through his whole trial and imprisonment, clear up to where he was executed, Stephen admitted to the women he killed, but he always denied having killed Anne. Eventually, the family was led to believe that the case was closed, even though there was no arrest or trial. A family member reported that even though he was a child at the time of Anne's death, he too thought that the law enforcement indicated Stephen Judy was the perpetrator. This relative is a cousin named Scott, and he, like I said, is 10 years younger than Anne, or was 10 years old when Anne died. And he actually began looking into the disappearance of his cousin and was surprised by some things. So it seems that the general belief that Stephen Judy was the killer and that the investigation kind of stopped with him. And so Scott, after reading about the arrest of the Golden State Killer, began looking into his cousin Anne's case. And using the Freedom of Information Act, he requested the records from her case only to discover that it was considered an open and unsolved case, and therefore the police record was exempt from the Freedom of Information Act. So Scott took matters into his own hands. With a friend, he began a social media campaign asking for information regarding Anne's disappearance or death. They used all the social medias. He acknowledged that in 1970, DNA was an afterthought, not a staple in investigations, and he hopes that there was some evidence collected that is currently being run against current databases. It is his goal to find the person responsible for the death of his cousin Anne, even though he himself was just a 10-year-old child when she was killed. Anne's funeral was a standing room only event. The whole town surrounding areas crowded into the little white church to pay their last respects. The principal of the school where Marjorie worked as a music teacher lived down the street and had become a friend to the family. And he said that this is kind of the last straw for Marjorie. She just simply stopped living and just existed, and then died in 1983 of cancer. And just a weird side note here, her find-a-grave has no information about her, not even her obituary. This is a picture of Anne as a baby. Cute little girl. And then there's a picture of Anne. This was the picture released when she disappeared. Still super cute. Looks like a ginger. Beautiful, beautiful girl. There's a picture of Anne with her mother. So she favors her mom very much so. And then I found a picture of one of the bulletin boards that the city put up to kind of help find Anne. So sad. Thanks so much for hanging out with me today. I know sometimes these unsolveds are a little bit hard to handle. They irritate me. I have a couple of other videos here for you to watch. I've added a subscribe button. If you haven't subscribed, I would love it if you did. Leave me a comment down below, give me a thumbs up, and have a really fabulous day.